All right, welcome everybody to the Credit and Collection News podcast. We are actually honored today to have one of the former CFPB staff and directors, John McNamara. And John and I go way back in time when neither of us had gray hair, and we were, well, maybe a few pounds lighter. I'm not going to go too far down that path because that would be kind of brutal to go that way. But we were much younger and much happy in our younger days, and now we're just seasoned and well. We're like fine wine. We're a little finer. How's that? We're
I'm not going to argue with that, Steve. And by the way, thanks for the promotion. I was an principal assistant director, never quite the director.
okay. Well, I always thought you were the guy in charge, so I'm not going to say too much about that. But
Yeah, always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
yeah, gotta love it. Gotta love it. Um, so let's for the people that don't know you, John, and like I said, I've known you, which seems like forever. I've probably known you more than not known you, and that's how old we are. But tell people a little bit about who John is, how you kind of got directed towards the CFPB, and then we'll talk a little bit about when you decided to leave and why. So I'll let you do kind of a nice little intro to who is John McNamara, because that'll be the first question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Steve. And it's great to, and thank anybody for watching this. And if you are watching this, take it from me, you probably need to raise your bar a little bit. Uh, anyway, or you've got just way too much time on your hands. No, I'm a bill collector. I started as a debt collector in 1983. So out of college, didn't even know what debt collections was, and I started as a collector trainee at the American Creditors Bureau, Kansas City office, and then actually was good at it. And I was good at it. I think because I had a little bit of an epiphany, and it was that collections was a marketing problem. And I was dealing with people that had no desire to engage whatsoever. So their energy level was low. They weren't buying what I was selling. And if I could figure out a way to raise the engagement level, then I could be a pretty good collector. And then that's kind of when it hit me that debtors lack hope. And sort of you need to reestablish a pathway where they can get back, where they can have some hope about their financial condition. And I used that, and I was pretty good at collections and good at training collectors. I kept getting promoted. I spent a lot of my career as a senior executive with American Creditors Bureau, then Nationwide Credit. Was there for just short of 20 years. From there, I went to asset management, or from there, I went to URS in Houston, Texas. Great experience there, working with Jim Kelleher, Doug Schultz, Drew Anderson, and the best technology the industry had. And I was always a bit of a technology nerd. And even at the American Creditors Bureau, I was on the core team that built out our own collection management system. We called it Access. I think we called it that before Microsoft actually had an Access product, but it was actually Windows based before there was a Windows. It was a system before anybody else that allowed the collector to actually request and pull up a credit bureau report. So right there on the screen. And so I really had the bug for collections, for training collections, for technology. URS had what I thought was some of the best technology around. So I did that for a couple of years, managing a Citibank portfolio. Then a friend of mine called me to be the chief operating officer for asset management outsourcing in Atlanta. That's Mike Chamberlain, who was an absolute good friend, mentor, one of the brightest people I ever worked with. And I did that. And then I had a crazy idea at a really bad time. And that was Brett Crandall, a good friend of mine. And I decided to start an agency right before the Great Recession. That was called Fidelis Recovery Solutions. We were making payroll. It was scary, terrifying. That was my first startup. But it wasn't throwing off enough cash for both of us to sort of be happy. So we had decided that one of us would go get a day job, the other would stay and run the agency. So about that time, I got a call from my friends at LiveVox I think the audience probably has heard of those guys, but they were a small company. It turned out when I was at Asset Management, I was their first debt collection customer. And I was kind of an unofficial advisor, and I was a free evangelist for the product because I loved the concept. And they were looking for a chief marketing officer, and I said, "I'm your guy." And so 45 minutes later, I had a job offer that I signed to work for them. I was a chief marketing officer for 5 or 6 years. We grew the company, had a blast, delivered, I thought, awesome value for customers. And the CFPB was standing up about that time. And it was, that's the biggest change in the collection industry that you or I had ever seen, right? It was,
right. Yeah, definitely
a tectonic shift. And so a lot of what I was doing at LiveVox as the chief marketing officer was trying to help the industry get ready for this new beast called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And so I'm chugging along, having a great time, and I get a call from my friend John Tonetti, who had taken a job at the CFPB as the debt collection program manager. And Tonetti, and for anyone in the audience that knows Tonetti, they will what I'm about to say, they'll realize it's completely on brand for this guy. He calls me and he says, "John, the CFPB wants to talk to you." And then he just went silent. And as LiveVox would have been a servicer for covered entities of the CFPB and therefore subject to its authority and certainly subject in some aspects to supervision, I froze. And while Tonetti let me just hang out there, I thought of every egregious thing I'd done since kindergarten. And then Tonetti said, "Hey, I am leaving the CFPB. My kids want to go to college. I need to earn more money. I'm going to go to JP Morgan Chase." So he goes, "You'd be ideal for the job." So he planted a seed that grew. LiveVox was sold to Golden Gate Capital, got equity out of that. Fidelis, I sold that to the last of my equity in Fidelis Recovery Solutions and Dennis Cunningham, and I applied for the CFPB job. Well, first I went home and I said to my wife, Linda, I said, "What do you think about giving myself a 6-figure pay cut and us moving to a higher cost of living city?" And she said, "Go for it." I mean, I think she realized I was looking for a new challenge. And so I applied, 6-month process, I got hired. I was going to help them with Reg F because this might sound a little, it sounds pompous and arrogant, but I don't mean it to be. I knew quite a bit about collections. I'm self-aware enough to know I knew far from everything, but I knew a lot about it. And I was afraid that in the promulgation of Reg F, they would just hire somebody that wanted a government job. And that would be terrible. They needed somebody with some senior gravitas that sort of knew how things worked. And I got the job. And I think I was a very persistent, effective, sometimes annoying voice of industry reality versus anecdotes that debt collectors are evil. Anyway, got Reg F done, thought I'd go back to private sector, but I got promoted a few times. And so, 3 or 4 years to get Reg F out turned into 11 years. And then I retired mid-July. And, for the record, I'm sure most of your audience, if they're interested in debt collections, have been following some of the CFPB, certainly interesting times. On the Thursday before Easter, they fired everybody on my team except for my very awesome senior deputy, Leslie Parrish, and me. So like 40, I guess maybe 42 people gone, and just Leslie and I to do all the work. And that's when I decided it was time to pull the plug and retire and do something else.
That's government at its best, right?
I know that's a long answer, but it's been listen. I've had a great career, Steve. I'm truly blessed in that every job I've had has sort of been a little better and more interesting than one before it. And it's no different with the job that I took as the chief growth officer for Avtal.
Well, it's definitely like I said, I joke about it with you and we've talked about it, but I mean, you've gone from the dark side to the darker side to the even darker side to I don't even know what side it is anymore, but it's too dark to see where you're going.
No, it's yeah. I was going to say it's funny when I first took the job at the CFPB, I'd kind of break out how my industry contacts and friends, far more friends than contacts, reacted, and I'd say, let me break that down. 90, probably 85% thought it was a good thing for industry because I think they trusted me to try to be a voice of reason. 10% thought I'd just gone evil into the dark side being government, and I was turning my back on debt collections. But this very interesting 5% thought that it was my plot to bring the CFPB down from within.
I love that. That's now that you've left, you can, the evil empire was destroyed by, John, John
Yeah, and I guess
John's little plan to make it all work so we can just call you John Skywalker. So you're there.
yeah, except it was never the evil empire. And and Steve, you know this because you're well connected in the industry. A hobbled CFPB or a no CFPB is the worst thing imaginable for responsible industry. It is the best thing imaginable for edge players, scammers, folks that don't want to follow the rules because hell, they don't want to follow them. They've never read them. Um, and it puts the responsible industry folks in a position where they've got to look at what the states are doing. They've got to decide what's going on. And I was, I went out the door the very last day at the CFPB. I was bending the ear of some of the new politicals they weren't Russell Vogt types. They were more like traditional Republican, serious minded rule makers and that they don't get engaged in over deregulation. I let them know. I heard
Right.
four or five industry friends came to me with rumors that the bureau was going to reopen or get rid of Reg F, and it's like, once law is out there and settled, you want to leave it alone unless it's absolutely fatally flawed. And Reg F was working pretty well. Were there things I wish we'd been able to do a little bit better? Absolutely. The freaking date on the model validation notice. I wish that was not an issue. I wish people were not getting sued over that because I know consumers aren't harmed when there isn't a date there or there's a date. I am particularly proud of the language around the ability to use text and email under FDCPA, and so I'm very very proud of that.
Well, it's actually you go from where the CFPB when it originally started, and to kind of where it's at right now. You've kind of seen that the peaks and valleys, just like everything. But if you don't have the CFPB, you've got 56 or so AGs that are now throwing rules at you that wouldn't necessarily be thrown at you, because I know that from any debt collector's standpoint, if you've got one centralized decision maker, whether you like it or not, it's much easier to work with than 56 decision makers who are not going to agree on anything, which means you got 56 different rules you're going to have to follow, besides everything else. So there's goods and bads and everything, and having the Fed's in charge, and I know it's kind of an interesting conundrum to be in.
Well,
So
it's Steve, you know this, okay, and it's funny that it's not funny, but you invite enough attorneys general to your conferences that when people say that AG stands for aspiring governor,
governors.
like
Oh, yeah.
it's not a joke. When you've got people engaging in policy for political gain, I mean, that is
It's a recipe for
terrible.
disaster. It is. It is.
Yeah, no. I mean, listen, if I could rule the world, I would say no one gets to be the director of the CFPB or a commissioner for the FTC or the comptroller of currency or on the Federal Reserve Board unless you sign an agreement in blood that you will never, ever aspire to political office.
Right.
You can't use the people's money to sort of get yourself or position yourself to become, a governor or a senator or, a representative. You need to be doing the work that's in front of you, the work that's at hand, to protect consumers, but also you protect consumers. And I believe this from day one. You protect consumers by also protecting responsible industry.
It's true, and that's again, and that's usually who shows up at the conferences along those lines. It's the people that want to do the right thing. They want to do business the correct way. They want to follow the rules. They obviously want to be successful at business, but they're not going to jeopardize, everything along the lines, to get to that. So, I mean, it really is. that's the kind of understanding. When you get that cooperation, and like I said, you've always, when you were at the CFPB, you were constantly coming to our shows and speaking to the group, so that people would understand and can kind of get that, and that's kind of what we always try to shoot for at the shows, and make it work that way, because it's, the more conversations that people have with all the players in the industry, the better it is, because everyone comes out of it better.
Yeah,
Whether
right.
you
And
agree with all the rules or not, the rules are there to follow, so you have to follow them. And then if there's a reason that something should change, in particular, say that there was whether any of the rules that were kind of counterproductive to what it is, FODI kind of comes to mind. What it is, and how do you follow it, and if you follow one rule, suddenly you're in violation of another. You're kind of backed into a corner as to what am I supposed to do? And then when people start scratching their heads again, I'm not really sure how we're going to get out of this one, because you
yeah,
get.
no, I think you touched on FODI, and I think that's a great example that I think industry, if they're halfway aware, realizes they didn't like the CFPB, but they've got to admit, like we attempted, and I think we did. We fixed FODI with the limited content message. We came up with something, and it was reasonable as could be. I mean, every collector has a hierarchy of sins in their mind, and it's way worse of a sin to engage in third party disclosure than it is to not reveal the nature of the call because you're trying to protect that consumer from
Right,
third
right.
party disclosure. And I mean, it so frustrated me that there were consumer advocate groups that acknowledged that FODI was kind of dumb, but at the same time, it was also a moneymaker for the members of their groups that engaged in for-profit lawsuits against collection agencies over technical violations that really you'd be hard pressed to point to any consumer harm from them.
Yeah, I agree, because it's part of it, and like I said, you got to walk that line for 11 years, so good
No,
for
and you know what? It's one of the reasons I stayed at the Bureau was I had an incredible team of some of the smartest people I ever worked for, but the work was valuable because it both Richard Cordray and Kathy Kraninger. By the way, that's another mission that I'm on. That the G is hard in Kraninger. It's not. I've seen her so graciously listen to people butcher her name, but it's Kraninger. Um, anyway, they listened to, they looked at data, they considered data, they listened to and considered the realities of how industry operated. And they listened to experts, they listened to people in regulations and in research and in markets, and then they made decisions accordingly.
Right. So, you served under three different directors, from the start to finish, and I actually, I interviewed and spoke with both Richard and Kathy. That way I didn't butcher her name there. Just point that out.
It
But
starts with you. It starts with you. My mission starts with you, Steve.
there you go. There you go. But both Richard and Kathy, they've spoke at our shows. They're completely different people, and stuff. But they were both, they both had their positives. They both had their negatives. But I learned a lot when I had them speak at the conferences and stuff. And so you actually worked under three. I didn't. I didn't get a chance to interview Rohit. Not that I didn't try, because I did. But how was it working under the three of them? Because they're completely different people. They seem to manage in different ways. But talk a little bit about how it was working for three different directors, and how you kind of work through it and survive that.
Yeah, it's for one thing, for markets to be effective, we had to have access to the director and we had to be influential with the director. And certainly, well, here's Rich was called Rich. I called him Rich. Kathy, I called Kathy. Rohit insisted on being called director. Infer what you like from that. But no, I think I would say while Rich was appointed by then President Obama, Kathy by then President Trump at number 45. Um, again, one Republican appointed, one Democrat. They both listened to data. They both reasoned, and I actually both witnessed them change positions or alter their view on things. And one thing that Kathy did that I thought was very responsible. As we were working through Reg F, we would meet with her. Kristen McPartland was the team leader for that debt collection rulemaking, one of the best team leaders I've ever seen. And if you were going to call somebody the parent of Reg F, Kristen gets that title. I think she's left the bureau. Again, that's part of what makes me sad is you've got this brain drain of really bright people moving into private sector or other places. She's gone, I think, to PayPal, and PayPal's lucky to have her. But as we would go through the policy cuts of how we were going to land on the rule, Kathy was very interested. She'd look at us, oftentimes me, because I was more outwardly facing, and she'd say, how is industry going to react to this? And then how are the consumers going to react and why? And she really wanted to know what the real world impacts were going to be on those rules. She was thoughtful in that regard. Rich sometimes came into the room with a position on something that some aspect of debt collections he didn't like, and that would be a starting point. That we, I hate this, but then he would sit and he'd listen, and he would walk out of there sometimes like that he's shifted his position or realized like the team had a position and respected the fact the team was comprised of fairly smart people, present company excluded, that would work. I didn't see that with Rohit. Rohit was the first director that insisted on being called director, and I never really saw him change a position on something. So he seemed to be largely unaffected by facts. He also seemed to listen to just a couple of senior advisors, and not like the experts, and that bothered me. Try as hard as we might. Markets had a hard time sort of getting into the room to basically explain how the actual lay of the land as far as industry goes. And interestingly enough, my friends in consumer populations, those are the students, the older Americans, the service member affairs folks. They had a similar problem with Rohit, which was kind of surprising.
Yeah, that is a little surprising, but like I said, it's we worked real hard to try to get and because again, that's kind of we're trying to get that whole concept of be together, talk to us, make things work, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Both, like I said, both Kathy and Richard were very gracious with their time, and we're comfortable with it. As obviously you were, because I mean you were the right person to come speak to the group and stuff. And
Oh, so I read it. Like we had to read a book in like, I don't know, third or fourth grade called Flowers for Algernon. You should look this book up, but it scared the living crap out of me as a kid. But it's about this mouse. They give a drug, and the mouse exponentially gets better at learning. And so this kid takes it, and he also gets exponentially better at learning. And then eventually it starts fading, and the kid doesn't go back to the normal state, but actually goes worse. And I always thought about that book as soon as I joined the bureau, and I used to plague my direct reports with this, that when you come into the CFPB from industry, you've got this great knowledge, or you should have some pretty good knowledge of industry, but that starts eroding the day one. So I was always like, I wanted to be out there. I wanted Gandhi to be out there. I wanted Mark Cavan to be out there. I mean, specifically lobbied Kathy to let me hire some fellows so I could bring in like fresh sets of eyes and ears from industry. So we stayed fresh. But my knowledge of debt collections was pretty extensive. Not one that God's gift to debt collections by any means, but the minute I joined the bureau, like I started losing track of that. Right? I mean,
right, yeah, because you're looking at it from a different perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah, I haven't talked to a debtor in over 11 years. What do I know?
That's probably a good thing. What about?
Steve, you know this. The higher up you get in collections, as you become an executive in collections, your conversations with debtors involve giving money back, not bringing money in.
Well, of course. I mean, well, of course, my first call when I was a debt collector way back when I was working for Sears, I was already starting to give money back and stuff, and the guys all bang their heads, going, "Oh boy!" Then this is not the right person that we want trying to collect money for us, because I'm like, "Oh my God, that's a horrible story. I got to give you money." So needless to say, yeah, that it's. They moved me over to sales right away because it was like, haha, no, he's not a collector.
A good
Um,
move for everybody.
yeah, probably. Talking about the future of when you left and stuff, and it's still in limbo, and the headlines are still coming, so it keeps us in there. I know Russell just announced that he says give me 2 or 3 more months, and we can he's thinking of closing it down. I don't know if that's really going to happen, or if he's given the sound bites to the news media so that they can throw some more stuff out there. Obviously, the government is, when we're recording this, is still shut down, so technically I guess they are shut down. um and are they going to open back up? Eventually, it's like, when do you pay your bills? Eventually, you get around to it. That's what we're going to do. So eventually, the government will reopen and things will kind of work back to normal. But the question is, where does what are your thoughts of where the CFPB is going? You were inside, now you're outside looking in. And what is it? Because I think the industry is always concerned over kind of what we talked about. You know, without the CFPB, are you spinning the wheel saying, "Hey, I got 56 directions to go in," meaning, the 50 states plus the territories. So you got 56 of them, if I counted on my toes and fingers correctly. But don't hold me to it. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, until Russ Vogt went on the Charlie Kirk podcast just recently, like Doge, something put the bureau, like Doge came in, Elon Musk and Doge came in, and USAID was clearly job one, and they wanted to get rid of USAID. That's something over a beer. I can talk about that. Something put the CFPB on the president's target list. I don't think it was there originally. I really think Rohit deserves a lot of credit for getting the bureau put on the get rid of it entirely thing. So they were going to try to get rid of it then. The firings were illegal. They were all hired back. They tried to do it again the Thursday before Easter. Those people were hired back. So you've got, you've got maybe at this point, I'm guessing around 1,400 staffers who they know the boss wants them fired, but the boss can't fire them. And they're getting paid, well paid, and they have been for over 10 months or 10 months. So when they tried to fire it down to 200 people, that's as close as Russell Vogt, unless he's got super secret magic powers I don't know about. That's as close as he can get to shutting the Bureau down. Because only Congress can get rid of the Bureau. It was created by an act of Congress, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street
Right.
Reform and Consumer Protection Act. They've got budget after Congress cut their access to Federal Reserve money by I think 46%. So the Bureau at 1,400 people, the most money they have, the best possible outlook for the CFPB is maybe 650, 700 people. Now, I also think that's the best possible outlook for a responsible industry, and pretty much anybody listening to this. You get it down, if they go 200 again, and again, I thought they were on their way to maybe 700 people, because some of the politicals that have come in are serious-minded policy folks. I mean, I think some of the politicals that were there when I left were Joe Gamello and Ellie Greenbaum. Again, serious-minded policy folks. And then they hired someone that I also have respect for, and that's Jeff Gradler. I mean, I don't think he is like a burn down the house extremist. And I think all three of those gentlemen realized that a non existent or a completely hobbled bureau is absolutely terrible for capitalism. It's terrible for the stock market. It's terrible for the economy. And it's terrible for consumers too, because it makes it harder and more expensive for folks to lend money. Um, I'm still praying and lighting candles that when they fire, because they're going to have to fire, and that's sad, but they're going to have to get it down to maybe 500 or 600 people. Um, it could go as low as 200, and that's bad for everybody. He can't
Right.
fire everybody, but then some of his people are on record, like under basically in court proceedings, they've said under oath that they're not going to close the bureau. And then you've got the direct, or rather Russell Vogt, saying on the Charlie Kirk thing, he's closing it in 2 or 3 months. I mean, that's a picture perfect example, Steve, when I was speaking at one of your events, when you would ask me questions about active enforcement actions, I would not answer.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
it's the whole thing strikes me as amateur hour.
We were talking about what's where the CFPB is heading and where we're going. So why don't we continue with that because that was relevant and that was good.
Sure. I think the I really think that I'm really hopeful that they'll go with about 400 or 500 people. But also, what's terrible for responsible industry is that when there's a Democratic president in office, like there will be a lot of temptation to respond to the Russell Vogt moves to go back the other way. And if you want to restaff the bureau, federal hiring is very difficult and time consuming. And the only way to do that would be to restaff the bureau with as many political appointees as possible and as many fellows as possible. And that means likely folks that are going to have very extreme opinions that'll be on the other side. So, this Rohit to Vote to whoever takes over in the future, like that makes me very sad because it seems like a wildly swinging pendulum that no responsible industry can operate efficiently in.
Yeah, well, especially if it changes every 4 or 8 years, because it really does. Once industry and government and they're all working in cohesion and stuff. And I don't think it can ever swing too far because the states obviously are going to get involved. In
Mhm.
particular, I know the both New York and California, of course, which are obviously large populations, and they're going to swing things in a certain direction no matter what. And then you've got the other 54 that are going to push in certain directions. Granted, no offense towards the small states, but you're not as worried. But if you're getting sued by a small state, the big states smell money too. So if it looks like it's a good thing, they're going to work it too because everybody wants their dollars. Um,
Well, I think people need to be really worried that some of the people that are very extreme in their views are populating some of these states. And when it comes to debt collections and debt buying, like deregulatory times have never been good for debt collectors because we're sort of a popular target for both Democrats and Republicans.
sure. And that's always going to be but there used to be and with attorney generals in particular it used to be whether you had a blue AG or a red AG come in and speak to the group, they were all tough on crime. They were not political animals. I'm not sure that's still quite the same. I think there's a lot of AGs now that are, kind of what we joked about at the beginning when you talk about what's an AG and, aspiring governor. That's what they want to be. But it used to be that AGs were focused in on, they were all tough on crime. Because that's the definition of attorneys general.
Mhm.
You're prosecuting those that don't follow the rules.
Yeah,
Um,
you're the state's top lawyer. You're not the state's next governor.
Right. And that used to be I used to always love having AGs come speak because AGs they were that's who could be the toughest and stuff, and I'll always remember we had four of them I think in Half Moon Bay when they were all speaking there, and they all wanted to see who could be the toughest. And actually at the time Cuomo was in New York. and they all disliked him because they had that big education lawsuit. And he took all the money and he didn't dissipate it out to the rest of the states. And so you had one person very happy, and then you had 55 people that were not so happy because they didn't get their fair share.
Right.
That it is what it is, and so, but that's kind of what we do about. Um, you are kind of I would call you a startup junkie because you like to work that route. And before we jump off of this, what are you doing now? Talk a little bit about where you've gone because like I said, you've gone just about all the directions you can in this industry. So what's John doing now?
Yeah, that's my favorite question. So I'm going to go all the way back to 1983, and my first debtor that I talked to, Romeo, um, last name to be unknown, but it was hard getting this person on the phone because he didn't want to engage. And as a collector, I realized debt collections is mainly a marketing problem. And that's exactly what it is. And in marketing, and Steve, you know this, you've been in sales and marketing your whole career. And their job is to raise the level of engagement through various impressions on the consumer so that they begin considering your product. Well, you know, debtors don't want to engage with anyone. I mean, that's why they're debtors. They stopped engaging with the creditor. So, any way to get them to engage at a higher level and give you any information is valuable. And I saw that as a rookie collector in '83. It continued with LiveVox. And actually, I taught collectors that I wrote the training programs for what was the largest agency in the world at the time. That was a combined nationwide credit. And it was all based on concepts of marketing, establishing higher levels of engagement, and building some trust with the consumer. And it worked. I mean, money went up, complaints went down, and I'll tell you what else went up was collector tenure because it was easier on collectors to operate that way. It didn't grind them out, burn them out. LiveVox was a similar play where I realized the LiveVox product could allow the collector to make contact with the debtor more frequently and at a time that was more likely to be convenient for the debtor. So you could actually have a conversation versus, the old days of a collector trying to engage a debtor when they had other things going on and were just trying to get off the phone. And that worked really well. And then at the CFPB, I realized debtors want to engage digitally. And I was a strong proponent of working through Reg F so that collectors could engage with debtors through SMS and email and other digital channels. And I was a strong, I was very much against any ideas about including SMS and emails in the 7x7 because the channels are perceived differently by consumers. They're more passive. They're asynchronous. And furthermore, the market punishment for being a sloppy emailer or a sloppy texter are way more extreme and way more quick than anything a regulator could do. So SMS, you get thrown off the network. Emails, you basically get bounced into the inbox, or Google or Yahoo tags you as a spammer. So, we got that done. I'm really pleased with how Reg F turned out on that. I was even more pleased at the SCOTUS ruling in the Facebook case that sort of did away with that need for prior consent for certain tiers of FMS communications.
Right.
So now I'm on the same journey. Like when I was going to pull the plug at the CFPB, I had 3 good offers with great companies. And a friend of mine, Joe Gelbart, had founded this little company called Avtal. And when I was about to pull the trigger on one of the companies, he called me and said, "Hey, we got a nice seed round of funding. I can afford you if you'll take a pay cut." I never asked him what the pay would be. I negotiated that later. But what Optel is a digital engagement service. And it's got 3 things that I think collectors should love. Not to make this too much of a commercial, but you know me, Steve. I'm excited about something. I'm going to run my mouth.
You're going to talk about it. There you go.
Yeah, it's sort of 3 chunks. The product is a product that uses SMS, email, and a payment portal that's white labeled for whatever collector's using it to engage the consumer And then each one of those channels collects data about how they engage with it to make the other channel stronger. For instance, how a consumer engages with the payment portal or the SMS indicates how likely they would tag a future email as spam. But we use that information to act. And I think what part of the secret sauce is, we're really good at doing the boring, hard stuff, which is getting emails into inboxes. So you've got that part. So we drive traffic to a payment portal. The next part, which is awesome, is we don't charge for emails or text. We only charge a percentage of whatever goes through the portal. So it's true success-based pricing, no charges for setup or fees like that. And then the third prong that I think is a good deal is anyone that I can't tell you how many times I felt like the poor kid outside the bakery with my nose pressed against the glass because I wanted this technology or that technology. And there are always two hurdles that kept me from getting inside and getting my eclair or croissant or whatever. And it was the cost and it was the complexity of the integration. So the cost we took care of was success-based pricing. The integration we took care of because basically you communicate with the service through CSV files. So you don't need any complex integration with the CRM. You don't have to go hat in hand to your CRM to get that done. If you can build a dialer file or a file to send to LexisNexis or for a bankruptcy and deceased scrub, you can actually get going with us. And we're actually helping agencies when they're facing headwinds from so many. Actually, they're not even, I guess they're whirlwinds, right? When headwinds come at you from all sides.
Yeah.
But we're helping agencies. And so adoption's high. I'm having fun. I feel like I'm really helping agencies at a time that they need it.
Well, there you go. That's on. Are you still going to retire to Paris? Head there and
No, we own a house in Atchison, Kansas, outside of Kansas City. So we are moving back there in near the end of January.
okay. All right. And then you'll just vacation in Paris like you always do.
Yeah, we'll probably get to Paris a little bit more in the future than I have in the last few years.
All right. All right. Because most people don't know this that you're a history buff. Because I remember talking a lot of history with you, and because I like history too, But it's fun to to travel and see all these places. I know you've been to a lot of places and you've seen a lot of things, and that's always a good thing. So
Yeah,
whatever
no,
it
no.
is.
I'll use history to give everybody a little bit of hope. Um, Reading history sort of almost always makes me feel better about the present. The present, there's certainly a lot of things to be worried about right now. Certainly political divisiveness. Sort of the country seems like nobody gets along with anybody else. When you read history, you realize as bad as it is now, it was worse. And it I this is how the odd way that my mind works, but I find it consoling that John Quincy Adams called Andrew Jackson's wife a whore when they were running against one another for president. So as far as like the recent campaigns, there's been a lot of mudslinging, but I don't think anybody did that.
No, no, we're probably not going down that path. Because that
Let's
that
hope not.
yeah, that's something that again that we'll all be banging our heads against the wall going, I can't believe but you can. So, it's good. Um, Anything else you want to throw out there before we wrap it up? Because
No, it just listen, your industry people, it's still important that you engage with the CFPB and the FTC. And for any like, oh my gosh, I was at a conference where every other person said the CFPB was three people. It's like there's 1,400 people. They still have enforcement attorneys. If you and quite frankly, Mark Paletta, who works for Russell Vode, I mean, he put out some priorities, and FCRA and FDCPA violations were still on there. So it is not a free for all. And if again, if the CFPB is distracted and doesn't see you, New York or California will.
exactly, and that's true, and that's something that they're gonna have to do. The FTC is still, I mean, minus the shutdown right now, but the FTC is still there. I know Chris. Like I said, I've spoken to him a few times about things. And like I said, the FTC's enforcing the rules. The CFPB's out there looking at you. Yeah, the states are looking at you. So there's a ton of stuff that, again, for the people that that are staying within the guidelines, it's great because if you're within the guidelines, I think that helps you out, and everybody wants to be that.
Yeah, actually, I had a great question at an event that I spoke at recently where somebody said, well, like, what is a responsible player to do? And I mean, this sounds kind of unsatisfying, but I think the state of play has sort of led you to sort of a principles based approach to how you treat consumers. I would stay that course, um, because there's high risk if you don't. And at the same time, eventually the pendulum's going to swing.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, that's a good way to wrap it up. John, thank you for I think we chatted for about an hour. There was a lot of good stuff in there. People dissect it and find all the stuff that they want to do. But I think that's congratulations on 11 years. Congratulations on the new opportunity. Congratulations on moving a little bit closer to that team that plays in Kansas City. Because I know that's important there too. So,
Hang on,
and like I said, thank you. There you go. There you go. You know what?
Chiefs, Chiefs.
Just for that, I'm going to put this on just to, like I said, you
Yeah,
might have got us in
listen,
a couple ends, but we're there. We're
the
there.
Niners, the Niners are so much fun to watch. I was just telling an industry friend this morning, the more of your starters that get injured, the better you guys play.
It's you know what it's just something that I guess we got to learn to deal with, and you know what after watching this stuff today with the NBA, I'm just sitting back going, well, you know what, let's be happy that we got a few injuries, but if nobody's betting on the games, then I'm going to feel good about the teams, and we can sit back and watch it all and smile and just not bet on it. How's that? Um, so there you have it. So John, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate that. Wraps up this credit and collection news podcast. Look for it in your all sorts of wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can find us, as well as, of course, just go to the CCN website, and we'll go from there. John,
And
thanks
Steve,
again for your time.
Steve, and I'll expect lots of editing.
Yeah, yeah, we'll work on that. Like I said, luckily we pay somebody good to edit this stuff, so we're doing well.
There we
Um,
go. Thanks for having me. And again, I wish everybody well. And I know these are crazy times, figuring out like what's the right thing to do. But principles based. I mean, I wouldn't, like I said, I think the folks I know in industry are on a good path. They're compliant. They try to operate and do the right thing by their customers and by their debtors, and stay that course.
that's why, like I said, that those are the people that come to the conference. That's for sure. That's for sure. Thanks, John.